In today's video, we are going to examine the possibility of seeing some huge trades here in the near future in the NHL. We're going to take a look at the Minnesota Wild and the Vancouver Canucks situations. I think it's possible we could be seeing big deals out of both clubs, possibly with each other, but possibly with other teams as well. We also want to take a look at the possibility of Vladimir Tarasenko trade being revisited. We also have several fines and other injury updates and news from the waiver wire. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. First up, let's get started with the news from the NHL waiver wire. We seen yesterday that expansion Seattle Kraken had placed forward Nathan Bastien on waivers, and he was claimed. He was claimed by his former team, the New Jersey Devils. So Bastien goes back to New Jersey, where he can likely get a spot playing in the bottom six. Obviously, things didn't really work out for Bastien with the Seattle Kraken. Of course, it's kind of weird in a way. We've seen the Seattle Kraken go through their process and draft their players at expansion. I know many of us, myself included, definitely, scratching our heads at some of their selections for sure. I'm not really sure that the Bastien pick was really all that terrible based on the fact that there wasn't a ton of great options on the Jersey roster for the Kraken to take in that draft, but still, they made a lot of weird selections, in my opinion. Very, very different process from Vegas. We saw Vegas not only make a lot of great selections, but also a ton of trades and side deals. The Kraken didn't go any side deals at all. Very, very limited, very little in the way of trades after they selected the players they did. Probably because there wasn't many with a lot of interest in other teams. And now Seattle's not having a great season. They're near the bottom of the standings, and they've had some of their players that they selected be put through waivers already, including Bastien, who they lose. They selected Vitek Vanacek from Washington, traded him back, and now the goalies they kept, like Grubauer, who they signed as a free agent, not doing the greatest. Of course, that is to a degree, the team in front of him has a role in that too. Chris Driedger not having a good start to his season as well, who they took from Florida and signed. Just some weird selections and just kind of, odd how things have played out here so far. I'll be curious to see how things do go forward with Seattle, and we can look back on this season and take a look back at all their moves and really evaluate things. Be curious to do that at the end of the year. Of course, Patrick Harper of the Predators, who was on unconditional waivers yesterday for the purpose of contract termination, was cleared. No surprise there. So he's free to sign with any other NHL team, or I'm not sure if he has plans to maybe head over to Europe, the KHL, or any of the other pro leagues on the other side of the globe. We also got word that the Vegas Golden Knights were able to activate one of their top players in Max Pacioretty, so he comes off long-term injury reserve, which is a welcome return for Vegas. They recently got Stone back, now Pacioretty's back. To do that and have the space to make it happen, William Karlsson, who was on regular IR, has been placed in LTIR for the time being. At some point, Vegas is likely going to have to make a deal here and shed some salary. Of course, they're hoping to get Jack Eichel back after the probably after the Olympic break as well, probably what's reasonable. So be really curious to see how this team looks once they're fully healthy. They've got a lot of injuries that they've been dealing with this year. They've done okay considering, but I'd be really curious to see what they are when they're all fully available. Lots of fines handed out after last night's game between Columbus and Winnipeg. They had a lot of incidents, you could say, at the end of the game, which resulted in Max Domi getting fined $5,000 for unsportsmanlike conduct. Josh Morrissey was fined $5,000 for slashing. I wasn't overly fond of the Morrissey thing. That was another situation where Columbus was going down. I believe it was Texier going to score an empty net goal, basically wrap up the game, and Morrissey came back and just gave him a real solid two-handed whack into the shins. I mean, it wasn't too serious, but it's very poor sportsmanship. In my opinion, it makes you look like a big baby. You can't handle losing. And I don't think the Jets want to have that kind of reputation. I mean, we already saw what happened last year in the playoffs with Mark Scheifele going back to defend an empty net against Jake Evans in Montreal, and he had that massive hit that wasn't necessary, which put him out for the rest of the playoffs. Evans by injury, of course, and then Scheifele by suspension. Different situation, but still the same sort of thing. They need to move on from that kind of stuff and just wrap things up here with a little bit more integrity than that. That, to me, I think should have been at least a suspension of at least one game, just to kind of send a message that kind of stuff is not acceptable. A fine's one thing, but really these fines are slaps on the wrists for guys making millions of dollars. There was also another fine in the Senators-Sharks game last night. Sens defenseman Nikita Zaitsev was fined $5,000 for cross-checking in a situation with Sharks forward Timo Meier. Now, it was also kind of a unique situation last night in the Ottawa-San Jose game. All four of the center icemen have links to the San Jose Sharks, which is not something you normally see. Of course, Josh Norris, the number one center, was drafted by the Sharks. It was one of the top players and prospects included in the Erik Karlsson trade. Playing in the number 2 center spot last night was Timmy Stützle. Stützle was drafted number 3 overall in the 2020 draft, which was their first round pick from the Sharks that came over in the Erik Karlsson trade. So the fact that they have 2 top 6 players out of that is phenomenal. And then, of course, they have Chris Tierney playing in one of the center spots as well, usually the number 3 spot. Of course, he came over as well in the Erik Karlsson trade. And then, of course, their number 4 center right now is Dylan Gambrell, who they picked up from the Sharks in a small trade earlier this season. So it's just, I thought it was kind of a unique situation that you don't really see very often, to have that much linkage between the teams and have all 4 center icemen on one side start their career and be linked to the opponents. Of course, we also saw a couple of firsts last night. We saw Sean Durzi, who was drafted by the Leafs, traded to the Los Angeles Kings in the trade that brought Jack Campbell and Jake Muzzin to Toronto. Durzi's had a pretty solid piece of development and growth since leaving Toronto. Finished out his junior career, has been playing in the minors. Was one of the top scoring defensemen this year in the AHL. Get a chance to be called up and play his first NHL game against his former team, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, he's also a Toronto area kid growing up, so I'm sure he was probably excited to possibly play for his hometown team after getting drafted. But of course, he's making the best of it, playing now for the Kings, and he scored his first NHL goal, even though it was a bit of a lopsided game with the Leafs winning that game. He scored late in the third period. Still a great accomplishment for him to get his first goal, and against the team that drafted you. Certainly nice. We also saw Alexis Lafreniere have his first NHL fight, but not only that, he said it was his first hockey fight ever. We had the Rangers and Islanders do battle last night, and he ended up getting in a scrap with Jean-Gabriel Pageau of the Islanders. So certainly not something you see a ton from either of those guys, especially Lafreniere. So certainly a night first across the NHL. We also saw another weird situation where the Minnesota Wild were actually late for their game against the New Jersey Devils. They had previously played against the Rangers, and they had stayed in Manhattan instead of moving over to like a Newark hotel to be closer to the Devils arena. And of course, they had some traffic issues because of some closures and whatnot, and they ended up being, I think, about 25 minutes or so late. The game had to be delayed. I know the Devils head coach Lindy Ruff had some comments in his post-game remarks saying he thought it was irresponsible on the part of the Minnesota Wild. Of course, the Wild showed up late, but they still won the game in extra time, mind you. But still, it's kind of weird how they chose to do that. But some people said that clearly, they must have had their issues and reservations for staying in the Newark area. Obviously, I'm not an American. I live in Canada. Don't really know those areas overly well. But certainly, an odd situation that you don't usually see. Now, before we jump into the trade section and talk of today's video, I do want to pause for a moment for a quick word from our sponsor, Manscaped, with some details on their Black Friday sale, which is ongoing right now.
Take 25% off during Manscaped.com's Black Friday sale, with gifts for grooming from your nose to your toes and everything in between, like our Performance Package 4.0 Grooming Kit. So grab these deals while you still can, only at Manscaped.com.
So thanks very much for watching that promotional content. I greatly appreciate it. Just a quick reminder that the Top Shelf Hockey Merchandise Store also has its own Black Friday sale going on right now with 25% off. You can get yourself one of these hoodies or t-shirts, all kinds of great stuff there that have been selling at a good rate. So thank you for those who have already placed your orders. If you wanted to get orders in and have a good chance to get it before the holidays as well, I would recommend getting on that quickly. With the turnaround times and processing and shipping and everything, you probably don't have too much longer before you can be guaranteed to receive it before the holiday season kicks in here, but that sale will run here. We're going to leave the Black Friday sale up to the end of the weekend, so I'll give you the promo code here on the screen on the graphic. It's code TOPSHELF25. You can either click in the store down below here, depending on what kind of device you're watching this video on, or there's a link in the description as well, also on our community tab. As well, you can look at any of the hoodies, t-shirts, etc. The code applies to everything. It's a flat 25% off your entire order. Now, into today's trade talk, I want to touch on the possibility of Vladimir Tarasenko still being traded this season. Of course, listen to the recent Cold Stove podcast, which certainly spends a lot of time with reliable sources talking about various trade rumors around the NHL. This was a topic that was touched upon, given the fact that you have the St. Louis Blues had a really hot start, but have since cooled off. And then in the case of the Flyers, you have a team that, again, had a pretty good start. But right now, we're kind of trying to figure out at least what are the Philadelphia Flyers. They've had their ups and downs for sure, and you have to wonder if they could maybe look to make a deal to shake things up here a little bit. And according to NHL Rumours Daily, who runs this podcast, who's been a very reliable source, if you're not familiar with him, I wouldn't be quoting him and going by his information if it hadn't turned out to be very reliable here in the past. But he says that the Flyers were one of the big teams which we had heard about before involved in Tarasenko trade discussions in the offseason, and that Chuck Fletcher and the Flyers have not given up on that idea and dream of bringing Tarasenko to the Flyers organization to add that extra scoring threat. Now, the way things started with the Blues and they were winning, Tarasenko was starting to play pretty well and get some goals. You had to think a lot of us were saying, well, they're probably not going to trade him now. And many of the NHL insiders were saying that there's a pretty good understanding between the team and Tarasenko that even though there's a trade request that's certainly on the table and hasn't been removed, Tarasenko's aware of the fact that he might not get dealt. It's a difficult trade to do, and if the team's doing well, they might want to wait a little bit, and he was prepared for that. So, at this point, it's kind of difficult to say. Now, cap-wise, it's going to be challenging given the fact that he makes $7 million, so you'd have to look at some money going out for sure. Would the St. Louis Blues retain any? That's hard to say as well. I know Doug Armstrong was in the negotiations, or the rumors of the negotiations, seemed to be pretty reluctant to do that, which was a big part of the reason why it never came to be. I mean, not only was he not probably completely thrilled with the offers he was getting, but you throw in the fact that he wasn't willing to retain, which many of these teams wanted or needed him to do, and it just made it really challenging. Of course, he's not going to just give them away. You have to think he's concerned about the fact that if he gives away a former 40-goal scorer and he regains his form and gets back to that kind of play, that's really going to, possibly be a really bad deal for him. It's a tough trade to win. But if the Flyers are still, meddling back and forth here, I wouldn't be surprised to see them make a trade. And in the case of the Blues, where they're also not like they were in the beginning, and things are certainly a little bit more up for debate, I don't think we'll see this trade happen anytime real soon, but I can see both teams re-engaging in conversations, as they said in this podcast, if it's looking like a trade would benefit them a little bit later into the season. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see one or two big deals before the holiday freeze closer to Christmas. So we'll see how the next few weeks goes for these teams so they can get a better understanding and idea of where things are projecting in the standings. Now, when it comes to Minnesota and Vancouver, these are two teams that have been linked together a lot. They've been heavily discussed by the media in the last couple of days. It seems to be the big topic around the NHL of the Minnesota Wild calling the Vancouver Canucks with potential trade offers involving Kevin Fiala on their side. Listening to a lot of Minnesota Wild media in different podcasts and different video clips today, I really get the impression from their thoughts that it's a really good chance that even if this deal doesn't come together with Minnesota and Vancouver, that the Wild are going to continue exploring the trade possibilities for Kevin Fiala. Like we talked about here before, things didn't go well in the offseason with Fiala and the Wild, and as soon as he finally signed his one-year deal, I know I said about myself that I don't know what his future really holds with the team, considering we saw long-term deals in place for Kaprizov, long-term deal for Eric Signac, and this guy, even though he's a pretty important piece, they were reluctant to lock him up. I mean, there was word that they were really, really far apart in negotiations. We've heard Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman make reference to the fact that he does have a bit of a reputation for being overly confident, which comes across as cocky and can rub people the wrong way, which is apparently part of the issue when he first landed in Nashville. So, he's a confident young man, which is great, but when it's not meshing well with your teammates, it's hard to say. Clearly the Wild have reservations about doing a long-term deal with this guy. And, it's not surprising with the fact now that he's struggling a bit that they're exploring trade options. And, of course, Vancouver is a bit of a train wreck right now and a mess. Could certainly benefit from some changes. Makes sense by a lot here that they would contact them for trade. JT Miller's had a strong year. He's a guy that you can always count on for the effort, good results. So it makes a lot of sense that he would be a player they'd have interest in. There doesn't seem to be a ton of talk around Brock Boeser. I've seen some rumors with his name being mentioned, but the fact that he's going to be, looking at around a $7.5 million qualifying offer and his production's been down, it's not quite the level of interest that you would have seen in the past. And of course, even Captain Bo Horvat apparently has been getting a lot of interest and being talked about as well. When it comes to Horvat, he's not too far away from needing a new contract himself. He's looked upon as being a pretty steady center, good, reliable, two-way forward, good at both ends of the ice. You have to think it's, that if the Canucks are really not in a good chance to win, where he's going to be soon eligible for a contract extension, then he may not want to stay. You have to think he would be considering wanting to move on. If this season does not get any better, and by the time we hit the springtime, or like in the offseason, I should say, when he's eligible for an extension, if they haven't seen significant progress in turning things around, you have to think he's going to be thinking about, if he's still there, that is, maybe I should be moving on for a better chance to win. You can't help but really seriously think it's a strong possibility, but I've seen a lot of chatter today that Horvat's name is being discussed a lot too. And to be honest, there's also a lot of talk from some of the insiders, like I believe it was Darren Dreger saying that a lot of teams are saying they're calling Vancouver, inquiring about various players, but they're having a hard time really hearing back. So there's even some wondering that is Jim Benning even really allowed to make trades right now? That is up for debate. Like, I've seen cases of other reporters too saying that normally Benning is pretty good with the media and returning calls and text, and even if he can't say much, to provide something, some sort of a small quote, and he's not even returning messages and calls from a lot of that. So you have to think that maybe ownership is kind of advised him that they don't want to see that right now. I don't know, but there's also been word that the Aquilinis themselves are at conflict internally on how to handle the situation, that the Francesco and Roberto Aquilini are not on the same page for how they should handle the disappointing season. So, that's also an issue, which is not good. We saw reports today from, I believe it was Thomas Drance of the Athletic, saying that at practice today, there was a simple 2-on-0 drill that Travis Green was trying to run with the forwards. It was not going well. He had to stop the drill, and you could hear JT Miller barking on the ice, "We don't know what we're doing." So you really have to think that it's a room divided, that the room is not in good shape right now, and I really seriously have to think, is the coach still have these players' ear? Does Travis Green still have the room? Are they still listening to him? Or is it at the point that we have to see a coaching change? I don't know. Like we said before, if you look at the history of the Aquilinis during their time of running and owning this hockey franchise, they don't tend to make moves until they have replacements and plans in place. They don't make rash decisions. So you have to wonder if they're trying to put those plans in place now and they're just kind of buying some time. But as every game goes by, it's just getting more and more frustrating, I'm sure, for the players, the fans especially. It's just going to get worse and get uglier until something finally gets done. And when is the shoe going to drop? It's really difficult to say. But, they put up another stinker in their last game against Pittsburgh, and you have to wonder how long that's going to continue. Some are just convinced that they just don't know what they're doing all around. You have to admit their blue line is not nearly as good as they thought it was with the moves and the additions that they made during the offseason. The PK is absolutely atrocious, and when things aren't working, something's got to give here. So we'll see where this goes, but I do think that we're going to see some trades out of Vancouver. I wouldn't be shocked to see other players on short-term expiring deals like Tyler Mott or Jaro Halak, for example. Maybe Travis Hamonic could be down to a year. All those guys could potentially be moved. Wouldn't even be shocked to see them move the contract of Michael Furlan, considering he'll be on long-term injury reserve for the remainder of that time. Another team going for it for if another team going for the cup could possibly use that as their advantage to, to work their what they can spend through the LTIR method. So it wouldn't be shocking to see any of that stuff happen. I wouldn't be shocked to see Minnesota move Fiala, and it may not materialize to come together. But either way, I think both teams are poised for some significant movement here in the next little while, sometime between now and the trade deadline. It's just a matter of when, not if, the floodgates are going to open. So let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.